What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Creator Academy. My name is Kenny Joe. How is everybody doing today? Woo! Oh my goodness, here we go. There it is. How's everybody doing? All right, so today's topic is going to be a wild one. We got ourselves how to maximize your workflow efficiently. I know. What's going on? What's going on? How you doing? How you doing? All right. So the topic today is actually a thing that I overlooked very early on when I first started making content here on YouTube. And it's something that we all tend to overlook from the very beginning because we just think about playing the game and we want to produce content for our viewers, right? So we're going to be focusing in on a certain amount of topics that might stand out as a little foreign to you, so to speak. So we're going to be looking at how to plan out your video. Also, writing a script. I know, writing a script is not necessarily something that a lot of us want to think about or do. Also, we're going to discuss organizing those files before you go into the editing process. Then we're going to talk about some of the editing practices that I actually do. And then also we're going to do a little bit of the export, how I save that file before uploading it to the social media platforms that I use. And then also when it comes to working with an editor, which is something that I highly recommend as you get deeper into the creative process that you might want to consider. That way you're able to avoid burnout. All right, so before we get into how to plan out your video, let me give you a little bit of a backstory on where I began. So I had no video background, like no videography background. I had a very bad presence on camera, like absolutely no experience whatsoever, okay? So when I started making videos for YouTube, playing my favorite game, Clash of Clans, it was literally all about Clash of Clans. And so what I would do is I would go into OBS, I'd fire up that camera, get the game going, and I would just click record. Sound familiar? Some of you might actually do something like that. I had zero plan, and whatever happened, happened. Like I didn't really know what the topic was going to be. I didn't know what the thumbnail was going to look like, and I would just go in and do my thing. Well, over time, I started realizing that I'm replicating the same content over and over and over again. And a lot of times I was just rambling, you know, like I wasn't really on point with the subject that I was trying to instruct. So that's where I started looking about how to plan out my videos and really start to apply what that video is. So one of the things that you might want to ask yourself before you start creating content for a certain project is, what kind of video am I making? Now, there's different types of video formats, as you probably know. You got vlog style, you have talking head like we're in right now. So you also have to take into consideration that there are 3 different types of value-based content. If you saw that video that was over on the creator program, which is educational, which would be your tutorials and your guides and your update content. Then you had your entertainment. So you got entertainment value, which is whenever I go on a live stream, something crazy happens, I issue a challenge to my audience. Whatever it is, it turns into more of something that somebody wants to watch because they need to have a good day, some comedic value, if you will. And then there's also inspirational content, which I like to translate into the Let's Play content for Clash of Clans, because even though we're playing a game and we like to think that everybody knows how to play the games the way we do, a lot of viewers out there really don't know how the game is played, or, you know, best practices, so to speak. So they like to watch us do it and they try to follow along. And that's where the Let's Play type content comes into play, because it inspires players to enjoy the game the same way we do. So that's something that you need to ask yourself before you start making that content, is what kind of video are we making? So now, before we get into actually creating the script, I know writing out words is going to be hard, and it's something that I really had to learn how to do myself. Is during the planning process, we're going to go ahead and start thinking about what is going to be the video topic, like what are we trying to target? What is the thumbnail going to look like? What is the video title going to look like? These are all things that I'm planning out before I ever click record. So that way, when I go in to start doing that, it becomes a lot easier and I'm not rambling and just getting all over the place. So we're going to start looking at creating a script. Now, when I say creating a script, I'm not saying that you're going to write out an entire video's length worth of words that you're going to read off verbatim to your audience. Let's not do that, because then you have to think about all the B-roll that you're going to need to cover yourself up. Because if I'm sitting here reading this script right here, you can clearly tell that I'm looking over here reading the script, unless you can afford a really nice teleprompter that's got like right next to your camera or over top. Does that make sense? So what we're going to look about doing is creating more of a script outline. And what that means exactly is that we have this video topic that we're covering, and then we're going to start putting bullet points for the topics that we want to cover within that video. So let's say we're working on a tutorial for Clash of Clans, like how to, let's do Town Hall 9 upgrade priority guide, right? And essentially what that means is we get to Town Hall 9, and what are the buildings that we're going to prioritize upgrading to reach the end goal of a max Town Hall 9 before we go on to the next level, right? So when I start doing that, I'm going to write out, my intro, this is my hook, and then I'm going to start putting little bullet points. When you first get to the level, these are the key buildings that we're going to start upgrading, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, during this process, I'm also going beside my script outline, and I'm writing out what the potential B-roll is going to be for these certain sections of the video. Now, if you're not familiar with what B-roll is, it's actually the footage that goes over top of the A-roll that covers up and adds more detail to the footage or the video itself. So instead of just seeing me right now, if I'm talking about Town Hall 9, I might put a Town Hall 9 on the screen. That way it kind of shows the viewer this is what we're talking about, and they're not getting bored with seeing me talk the entire time. So we're going to write our bullet points, and then we're going to start writing out what that B-roll is going to be. And this is actually the point where I start recording that B-roll and placing it into the folder that's going to be for the video itself. So why is this important? Like, why would you want to create a script? Well, there's actually a couple of perks that come into play when you write out a script, is that you're familiarizing yourself with the content before you ever click record. So it's going to make you a lot more effective on video. It's also going to make you a lot more confident on video as well, because you know and you are familiar with the footage that you have been studying for like the previous hour before you started recording. You're also going to be able to shoot that video a lot faster. And this is something that I actually learned after I started doing it. I think it took me like, I don't know, I had to write out a couple of script outlines. I think it took me like 5 or 6 times. And then all of a sudden it just clicked. Like, I was so fresh on the topic that I was talking about that I realized that I recorded the video in a matter of like 10 minutes, which was actually crazy, because back in the day, when I first started recording content, when I just went into OBS, clicked record, and just started doing my thing, I would try to be perfect the entire time, which ultimately turns into a bunch of mess ups, and then you have to go in and cut it all out, which is just an absolutely painful edit. So by doing this, by creating a script, you're actually making the editing process a lot easier, because you planned out the script, you've planned out the B-roll, and now you've gone in and recorded the footage in different sections instead of just one massive section that you have to figure out later on in post-edit. Good? All right. So we're going to go ahead and jump into some organizational tactics, which would be some things that I had to learn the hard way. And one of the things that I did not do in the beginning was actually save and archive all of my files in the past. So I was working on a PC, making my videos, and I was saving literally everything on my PC. Now, if anybody out there knows anything about a PC, all those files stored on the PC being dropped into an editor is placing a lot of strain on the CPU, especially if you don't really have a very strong computer. So what happened is that I was getting these files, putting them in my editing software, and as I'm going through the edit, it would get slower, and the render time would get longer and longer. So what I had to start doing was investing into a couple of pieces of equipment. So we're going to get into that here in a second. So when it comes to recording the footage, there's actually a filing system that I have created for myself, and this is something that you might need to think about for your own work, is create a storage system or a naming system that works for you. So this is actually an example of how I name the files that I create. The first one is the parentheses in 1, which means that this is the first clip within the chronological order of the video. Then the date, that way I can go back and find this footage later on in the event that I want to reference it again. Then the name of whatever the video is going to be. And then on the back end is normally whether it's going to be camera, gameplay, etc., B-roll, whatever. Now, underneath that, we have the file location, which is the SSD that I have this file stored on. And then after that, we have the different types of file formats that I record in. So when I record, I no longer record just in OBS itself. Like, that's for streams. A lot of times I'll record streams in one file format, which is just a single A-roll line. But now when it comes to the more detailed content, I record my B-roll files, my camera separately, my game, and then also my audio. And that all goes on either a solid state drive or a hard drive itself. So this right here is actually an example of the file folder that I presented a moment ago, which is the Goblin Champion Challenge. So you're going to create one file for your entire video project, and then you're going to create subfolders for the different types of content, whether it's going to be backup audio, your B-roll, your editor notes. This one was actually sent to an editor. And then also my graded raw camera footage, and then other things like stills and the video source itself. So like I mentioned a moment ago, when it comes to recording that content and storing it off of your PC to take that strain off of your editor as well as your CPU, the first device is listed here is one of many that I actually have, which is the Samsung T7 Touch. It's an SSD. It's only 2 terabytes. It really doesn't have a lot of storage, but it's absolutely perfect for storing the files that I'm currently editing in the editor at that moment. And then I normally move those files after I'm done with the video over to the next drive, which is the SanDisk Professional 18 terabyte. This is on the pricier end. There are a little bit more, friendlier options for the budget, but this is what I use to store all my past videos. And I've got like over 1,300 videos posted here on YouTube. So I store this stuff that way I can go back and find the footage later on. And a lot of times what I did not realize in the beginning is that when it comes to like game updates or videos like the history of, I'd like to have that footage from the past. That way I can use it in the upcoming video. But if I deleted it all, I'd no longer have it. And this is something that I learned in 2019 or from 2019's content, is that I no longer have that footage because of the storage issues that I had in the past. So now that we've figured out how we're going to file everything and prep it up to maximize our workflow, we're going to start looking about getting into the editor. Now, when you get into your editing software, whether you use Final Cut Pro, you use DaVinci Resolve, or you use Adobe Premiere, you're going to need to start by creating a file for that project and saving it in the same folder that you have all the rest of your footage stored in. That way you know where that file's at and you can reference it later on in the event that things close out and you can't find it. Very obvious stuff, but some folks just don't know that. However, we're going to go ahead and start by dropping everything in our timeline and start trimming the fluff. And what that means exactly is that when I start editing, I take my camera and my gameplay footage first and I drop it in the editor, and then I line up all the audio because I have both of them recording audio for redundancy, because sometimes when you're recording you might have a glitch and you lose some audio along the way. It's nice to have backups in that case. So I'll line everything up and then I'll start playing through the video, cutting out all the fluff or all of the ums, all of the mistakes, all of the rambling, because sometimes you might just steer off topic. It happens every single time in a video recording. Now, after I do that, then I'll go back and I'll start linking everything together, like my different clips. So I had clip 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'll start linking that audio together with J hooks, L cut, or J cuts, L cuts, or jump cuts. Now, in gameplay footage, I don't necessarily use a lot of jump cuts. I tend to do a lot of J cuts, so that way we can kind of merge them together like up like that. And then after that, I'll start working my way through placing in my background audio, cutting it out in certain places where I want to be more emotion-filled or serious or funny. And then after that, I'll start working my way through placing in the B-roll. And so once all that's laid out, it goes relatively fast, because in the early days of my recording process and then my editing process, I would just drop like this super long line of footage from OBS into an editor. And a lot of times those videos ended up being like 15, 20, 30 minutes long because I wasn't really editing them at all. So don't be afraid to cut stuff. And that's something that I learned the hard way in the beginning, is that even though you might think it's very important content, got yelled at, hold on. Okay, so even though your audience, my goodness, that threw me off so bad. Hold on. Okay. All right, we're talking about editing here. So even though you think that the audience might actually want to hear or have all these super detailed information in there, you might want to consider cutting it out if it gets a little dry or repetitive. So once I have my B-roll in, I'll start adding in my still images, and then I'll go into my text and my lower thirds and stuff like that. So that leads us into understanding the editing system that you're working on, because if you're new to editing, it's very foreign, and you got this massive timeline, and then you have your display up top, and then all these different things off to the left and right depending on what you use. But I would highly recommend that you learn the shortcuts or the keyboard shortcuts associated with your editor, because instead of going up and clicking blade or the cut tool, each editor has a keyboard shortcut for doing that. So that way you kind of sit back like this and you're just kind of clicking through, cut, delete what you need to delete, and move on. Another thing that I learned way back when is that when you're working with different file formats, or if you create an edit that you really like, let's say the example here is gameplay footage and I'm in like a slim camera. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is me in a full 16 by or a full 1920 by 1080 frame right now, right? But what you saw in the presentation itself was where I had cropped it and I repositioned it. And that's something that I use very repetitive in my edits. So you're going to want to create presets. And a lot of times in the editing software, you should be able to save an edit and you can use it and just click on it, add it to the file, and it'll do it for you. So this cuts down on so much time of having to reinvent the wheel every single time you edit. And those help out. Oh my gosh, they help out so much. I mean, I went from like 10, 12 hours of editing time down to like 4 to 5, depending on the length of the video itself. So these are some other options right here that I also use when it comes to the editing process to minimize the amount of time that I'm behind the editor, and would be things like saving audio mixes. That way, when you add your footage and your audio to your editor, you just drop this stuff in on top. The same thing applies to saving the project media itself. Like if you're running like an intro, you have lower thirds, you have an outro video or clip, save that stuff within your editor that you use more frequently. That way you just drag and drop into your edit and you can move on. And then I think the same thing applies to background music as well. I do the same thing. This is all the same stuff that I do on my editing software, to include the guides to make sure that everything is aligned within the video frame that I want to be there. So once I've completed everything, I go back and I watch the video from the start, and I'm looking for misspellings, which happens every single time. I'm also looking for things that don't belong in the video, where I might have hid something and then it got visible again, like a overlay or something in the wrong place. But the biggest rule of thumb that I learned a long time ago when it comes to retention as well as the video playback and edit in the editor itself, is that when I'm playing the video back, if I pick my phone up at any point or I log into the game that I play at any point, you might want to revisit that content in the timeline. And that means that you probably got bored with it. And if you got bored with it, your audience is definitely going to get bored with it and probably either close out the video or skip ahead, which ultimately hurts the retention time. So that would be one of the things that I learned a long time ago, is that if you play back to check for mistakes in the edit and you get bored at any point, start to look about eliminating it. Which leads us into the perks of an editor, because this is something that a lot of people don't want to do from the start, and I didn't either. For the first 4 years of content creation, I did not work with an editor. I learned how to edit. I learned how to produce. I went back to university and studied digital cinematography. Like, I educated myself on the entire process to do it myself. And over time, I quickly learned that I was starting to become a little ineffective when it comes to the full edit. So I would start the editing process and I was super excited to do it. And then I would get bored along the way. It happens. Like, you start making a lot of sloppy mistakes and you stop taking as much or placing as much effort into the edit as you once did in the beginning, because it just becomes so repetitive. So consider looking at working with an editor, because it might be easier for some of you that are less confident with editing softwares, but for some of you that are very hardcore in your content creation, you might have a hard time letting go of the editing process, which is something that I had a hard time doing up until about 8 months ago. There are a couple of perks when it comes to working with an editor. It frees up time to do things that are a little bit more important. So instead of recording and then working on the edit, the edit for 4 to 6, maybe 10 hours, you freed up all that time to start working on the next video project itself or other platforms. Instead of just being solely YouTube, you can start working on things on Facebook, you can start working on things like TikTok, and you're just allowing more time for yourself. And that's something else to take into consideration, is that instead of editing all the time by yourself, and you're not taking care of yourself physically or mentally or your families, it just frees up so much time. So another thing is that it also adds another set of eyes to the footage or content. And if you have a really solid editor that actually knows the game that you're playing, or they know the content that you're working on, they tend to add a little bit more flavor to the videos themselves by making recommendations for the next video, or when they're making the edit, they do things that you might not see when you edit, which is actually really cool, because it's something that I didn't take into consideration in the very beginning when I first started working with an editor, which leads into burnout itself. So this is something that we all probably sit there and deny. You know what I mean? Like, when it comes to content creation, when you're first new to content creation, you're motivated, you're passionate, you want to play the game, you're super excited because you're on YouTube or TikTok or Facebook and you got an audience and you're trying to do everything for that audience, right? And that's something that I did in the very beginning with my free-to-play series back in like 2019, 2020, and 2021, is that I was doing everything for the viewer, which is so important, right? We want to bring the best content to our viewers every single time. However, we fail to realize that that's actually taking a toll on us in the end. And we might not be making the best health practices. We might not be going out and enjoying loved ones like we once did. We might not be able to do the things that we once did before we started making content itself. So this is where, if we do not look at our workflow and making it a little bit more efficient in the long run, it's ultimately going to lead to burnout. And I can speak from that firsthand, because after so many years of playing Clash of Clans free to play, which is actually a ton of work, I woke up one day and I walked by the mirror and I was like, oh my goodness, you put on like a lot of weight, I was just not eating very healthy and I was not sleeping very well. And a lot of the viewers started picking up on that, because they're ultimately a part of your lives. So if you don't really start making some changes along the way, it's going to lead to the part where you burn out in the end and you don't know how to get back to what you once were. So a lot of the topics that we covered within this presentation was plan out your video, research, think about what that video is going to be, think about the thumbnail, think about the title before you ever start to record that footage itself. Then look about writing a script outline, because I'm going to tell you right now, it might be a daunting thing for you to think about, which it was for me. Like, I don't like writing. But when you start writing out those scripts, it gives you a clear picture of what that video is going to be and how you plan to present that content to your audience. Also, look at your organization system for your files, because you might need to go back and find those files later on, or you might need to free up a ton of space on your computer to help it function a lot better than what it once was before. Looking at the edit, when we get into that editing system, that editing software, you have to have a plan before you go into the edit. That way you're not spending so many hours behind the edit just doing everything to replicate what you did in past videos. Learn those shortcuts. Create presets for yourself. That way you can save yourself time, and it will definitely help you out in the long run. When it comes to exporting, one of the things I might have left out in the presentation is that I name my files differently, and I'll go back to this slide right here. If we can get that zoomed in so that way you can see the name of the first file in there, it says, it's in brackets, and it says Final Goblin Champion Challenge. Now, the reason why I name it like that is because in brackets, it places the file at the very beginning of the folder. So that way, if you go back looking for that video or you need to upload it onto YouTube, you're not searching through a whole mess of files to find the final product itself. So that was just something that I had to start doing. That way I could find files later on. Now, the last thing was working with an editor, and I cannot emphasize to you how important that is. And I understand that does cost money, and that is something that you're going to have to look about later on if you're just starting out. But it's also, don't think about it as just spending money to make videos. Think of it as a way of investing in yourself, because by working with an editor, it opens the doors of the content itself becoming better and more relevant to the viewers, because a lot of editors that are highly trained and highly skilled are up to date on the most common editing practices for what keeps a viewer engaged in your content, and that ultimately lifts the retention time of your videos, and it also helps YouTube or TikTok or Facebook start recommending that content to the viewers outside of just the normal audience that are subscribed to you currently. And I think that's it. what is there anybody that has any questions that they would like to ask in regard to our presentation? Oh, I got to find the stream itself. I lost it. Oh man. Full Frontage says he's been a Final Cut user since I started out on Final Cut myself. Now, I am educated in Adobe Premiere as well, but I learned the shortcuts so well that I have a really hard time bouncing between editing softwares. Now, I understand that if I was making like a short film or something, I would definitely want to use the Adobe suite, because I can bounce between the Premiere, I can use After Effects, I can use Illustrator to do all these different things to the video projects. But since we're doing gaming content, I don't necessarily feel that the value is necessary for Premiere to be used. I'm looking to see if there's any other questions that might pop up. And while you do that, I'm doing this. How does one find an editor? That's actually a really, really important question. So there are options like Fiverr. However, I think the best way that I found an editor was by word of mouth and asking questions of other creators. That's how I found my editor. was I navigated through a couple of other creators, kind of asking who they had. We've also done advertising on Twitter where we said that we were looking for an editor, and multiple people reached out. And we kind of went through this process. So since I know how to edit very, very well, like I know the ins and outs of editing process, I normally would send like a project to an editor just like as a trial thing. And one of the things that I did not mention in the presentation is that you will need to learn how to articulate what the video is supposed to look like to an editor. This is something that I really struggled with in the beginning when it came to working with an editor, is that I didn't really know, like I knew what the video topic was going to be, I knew what the thumbnail was going to look like, but I didn't really know like how I wanted it put together, you know? And that's something that you really have to be able to explain to an editor. And if you could find one that's been around the scene for a while, they normally can pick up on it relatively fast, and they have a good idea of what your vision is. That's also where that script outline comes into play, because by creating that script outline, you can screenshot that script and send it to the editor, and they understand the chronological order of how you want that video laid out, as well as where to place the B-roll that you provide them. Does that make sense? Any other questions? Yeah, 7 years ago. Okay. Did you see an increase in views or retention when you switched to working with an editor? Not necessarily. I did see a lot of comments where they acknowledged that the content was different, but because, and the only reason I'm saying I didn't see much of a change in retention time is because I had shifted my style of content. So when I was recording in OBS in a single line format of content, that's where my retention was like 25, 30%. It was really, really bad. When I started looking at the creation of the title and the creation of the thumbnail and coming up with a plan for the video, then when I started scripting it and started shaving those 15, 10-minute videos down to 5 and 6-minute videos, that's when I started to see my retention sticking around about 60, 65%. So when you actually plan and understand how to edit, it starts to look a little bit better. But I didn't really see much of a change when I switched to an editor, other than the fact that they picked up that the music's different, and I just looked happier, I guess, because I wasn't editing all the time. I appreciate that, Joanne. Anybody else have a question? All right. Okay, so that is going to conclude our live session for the Creator Academy workshop, and our topic today was how to maximize your workflow efficiency. My name is Kenny Joe, and thank you for watching.